This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Jared Kimber. You can find him all across the board. And Jared, West Indies versus India up first. Now, the last time we spoke about this T20 series, the West Indies were 2-0 up. And then India, in the Florida leg of this T20 series, managed to draw level 2-2. But the West Indies ultimately came out with a 3-2 victory. Now, they haven't had much to write home about of late and not a lot of things to celebrate. So this is something that surely will provide them with some sort of respite and definitely restore some belief, right?
Yeah, I think, look, if nothing else, they probably just needed something after the World Cup games, right? The qualifiers. They just needed something. But no one thinks that India's taking this series massively seriously, and I'm sure we'll come to India in a moment. But, Puran making some runs is, one side of things. Hetmeyer answering the phone again is another one. It's just some of their better...
Hetmeyer catching his flight as well.
Catching his flight, yeah, being on his flight. So there's, I think from that perspective, just a few small things like that where you're just like, okay, well, all things considered, they actually played some cricket. They were there. They, did what they were supposed to do. They've got to take some wins out of that, right? I don't think it's going to change the trajectory of West Indian cricket. It is funny, of course, after one notable Twitter person said that West Indies should split up. I'm not sure if India should split up into 26 states to play their T20 cricket, but it's worth discussing.
Absolutely. No, they won the T20 series. They won an ODI. They drew a test. So, hey, I'm pretty sure that Antigua and Barbuda would not have managed to do that. But anyway.
Wait a minute. Just on that, have we worked out who would win this series if it was done under the women's Ashes point system? I think it's still India, but I don't think it's massively India.
Yeah, India still won more games, right? But I think
you get a lot of points for the test, I think, in the women's Ashes. So I think they still get that. But the point is that it is hilarious that we started there and we ended here.
Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious. And I think Vikrant Gupta owned up to it too. On a show, he said he was embarrassed that he said that because the West Indies is now winning. So we'll cut him some slack as well. Anyway, you mentioned Nicholas Puran. He had a lot of impact in this series and ended up as the leading run scorer. Also is in quite good form with that cerebral ton in the MLC final. And then Akeal Hossain is another impact player for the West Indies in the series who got rid of Jaiswal and Gill early in the last game. Now, both of these guys, we've both spoken about them previously, and we've both said that they are definitely your above average players in this West Indies squad. Moving forward, with the T20 World Cup coming up next year, do you see both of these two players, Akeal Hossain and Nicholas Puran, being pivotal to their hopes of maybe winning a third title?
Yeah, they won't win. So no, I don't see them being pivotal. But yeah, look, if you can't get the most out of Puran at a certain point, you almost do need to shut up the shop and start again. Do you know what I mean? Or you need to rebuild or whatever, because he's so good. If you can't get anything out of him, and Hetmeyer isn't playing consistently, it's like, God, what do you even do, right? So I've followed him a lot. I'm really interested in if this is just another flare up or if he's actually finally developed his game. He must be coming to that age where batters mature, which is essentially means they know exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are as much as anything, and they know not to overextend themselves, and they also know how to keep the engine ticking over on the games when you're not batting as well. If he's reached that level, then that should mean over the next 4 to 5 years, we see the best of Nicholas Puran. And for those who saw that early peak of Nicholas Puran, that's incredibly exciting. Like, he's just such a brilliant striker. So I would hope that that's what we see. We see, the next 4 or 5 years of him just being absolutely next level. Akeal Hossain is really, really interesting to me. You watch him bowl, and it's a bit like watching Mohammad Isam. Not Mohammad Isam.
The journalist?
Mohammad Isam. I've got him on my mind because I just read about him bowling left-arm finger spin. So I've now got him confused with Imad Wasim, the other left-arm finger spinner, who I don't think I was writing about recently. Or was I writing about? No, it wasn't. But it's a bit like watching Imad Wasim, where you watch him and you think to yourself, I can't believe I've put Muhammad. I've just pushed Mohammad Asam's bowling. This is a man who once wrote about himself bowling to KP, and I've just pushed his bowling into a whole nother tier. But the point is that Imad Wasim, sometimes you watch him, and I think you probably throw Michael Beer in this as well. There are some of those left arm finger spinners that you watch them in T20 cricket, and they're doing nothing. right? There's very little going on. Quite often they're not spinning the ball a lot. It really is. They're using the seam to skid it and to get the ball to stop a little bit. In Imar's case, you've got that little bit of in drift that he gets on occasion, which puts people off, and these sorts of things. But they're not obviously talented bowlers in the way that Rashid Khan or Sunil Narayan or Ashwin or these sorts of guys are, right? But they are incredible spoiler bowlers at stopping you from playing the shot that you want to play off them, right? And there's something about left-arm finger spinners that's always had that ability, but we're seeing it come through in T20 cricket. And so for me, Akil Hassan is a really, really interesting one because he's so good at that. And we've seen, at times, some hitting ability as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was
the
England.
ball.
Yeah, I think it was the England series. He hit a couple of good shots. Might have even almost made a 50 at one stage.
I think even when the West Indies traveled to Pakistan last time, I think he scored some runs with the bat as well.
Yeah, I think that was just that era when he was just he never made any runs before. He just, to me, looks like maybe that last West Indies generation was a golden generation, and they can't imitate it again. That's perfectly fine. But we are still seeing really smart T20 cricketers come out of the West Indies who, someone like him, you probably think there's not a lot going on when you first watch him, but the more you watch him bowl, the more you realize that there's a lot there. So I really like him. So I'm glad that he did something quite good in this series.
Yeah, likewise, I'm a big fan. I think he also played for the Multan Sultans in the middle and couldn't quite cement his spot. But I feel like Akil Hussain is someone who could be developed into, a better utility cricketer. If you look at his fielding, batting, and bowling, I think he can, contribute in all facets of the game. Just to wrap up on the West Indies, there were, of course, some other performances. Rovman Powell and Hetmeyer were both good in patches. They brought out that belligerence. We saw that. Weren't quite as consistent, but that's not T20 cricket anyway. Romario Shepherd was really, really impressive at the death and nailed some Yorkers. But the guy I want to talk about is Brandon King. This guy ended up as the second leading run scorer in this series. And in that last T20, he blew the Indian bowlers to shreds, right? This guy just went into beast mode. And he's been around for a while, right? He broke onto the scene in the CPL quite a few years ago. And now it seems like he's finally finding his feet in international cricket. So just wanted to know your thoughts on him.
Look, I think one of his bigger problems is he's a little bit one-dimensional. Like, he doesn't have as many, like if you compare him to Puran or Hetmeyer, they've just got so many extra tools that they can take you down on. And so he is the sort of cricketer that a generation before was a little bit like an Andre Fletcher or Lendl Simmons, or I'm trying to think of some of the other guys they had who came through. Who's the guy that Dwayne Smith? Those sorts of guys. But you look at them and you go, look, they're not top level talents, but those sorts of guys were coming through the West Indies and being very good, for short periods of time. But they had long careers, right? Brandon King hasn't really burst through. He hasn't played county cricket and, played as much franchise cricket at the top level anyway, that his talent would suggest. And this is my issue when I worked in the West Indies, was people would say things like, oh, there's no talent in the West Indies anymore. There's plenty of talent. It's not developing. And I think a lot of those West Indian guys, they got a signal boost from what happened with T20 cricket. And now we're looking everywhere for T20 cricketers. We're not just looking at the West Indies. So again, to come back to the Puran point, how old do you think Brandon King is?
Probably like late 20s, early 30s. It's got to be, right?
28. So he's just,
there you go.
He's just matured, right? And he's peaked. The big issue for West Indies cricket, and I've said this with, people like Odean Smith and Obed McCoy, you could put Puran in this as well, but there's heaps of them. No, it's like they basically mature at 28 and then they become good cricketers, and West Indies gets about 3 or 4 years out of them, and they're flawed cricketers because they haven't played enough at the top level to develop the way they should have. And I think he's just another really good example of that. Look, I think he is a good cricketer, but I also think that if they had developed their talent more early in him, he would have probably been playing for the national team around 24, 25, which means he would have been a really decent cricketer for a while. And now when he kicks on, when he matures, he would have gone to that level. Instead, he probably gets to this level. I still think there's a lot there. And I think there's a lot there with a lot of these guys. But the problem is, for someone like me, I hear about Brandon King when he's 19 or 20, right? And I kind of feel that there's no discussion of him between 19 and 20 and 26 and 27. And that's the thing that I think West Indies cricket is missing out on. And it's great that they're still getting players like him to come through, but it's not quite the level, of course, that that they need him to get to. But yeah, I do think he's a good cricketer. I just don't think he's ever going to be, a superstar.
Yeah, I mean, here's to hoping that at least he can get some franchise gigs out of this, as most of these guys generally do. And I mean, Shea Hope was also playing this T20 series and got some runs. So there's a career arc that probably none of us saw coming, right?
Yeah.
Moving to India, anyway. Now, the series result doesn't actually matter that much, even though this is like the first T20I series that India have lost in like 2 years or something. So there's that bit of, I guess, context. But
Can
if
I
you
just
look at,
stop you on that? I would say
sure.
that is the best thing that has ever happened to India in T20
Mhm.
cricket. Because when I kept doing the research, I just kept seeing them winning series over and over and over again, which to me means as much as anything, they weren't trying anything,
Yeah,
right? That
that's fair.
you don't want to win all the T20 is a random thing. You don't want to win everything. You actually want to learn as much as you can and develop.
As Hardik Pandya has suggested. And one of the things that came good for India, especially in the fourth T20, and we've been speaking about this since the IPL, right? That Gill and Jaiswal are the future and the way they bat in T20 cricket. I think I even have you on record on one of the Uncovered podcasts where you said that those two should be opening for India, period. Like it shouldn't be like a second string choice. Those
Mm.
guys are your best bets. And they were at their belligerent best in the fourth T20. Both got runs. They secured a very one-sided victory for India, brought out all of their shots and charisma, and they're just so attractive to watch bat. Do you think the time is now to just make this India's, frontline opening pair in T20Is, or do they still need to give them some time?
Got a year before the World Cup, don't we? Year and
Hmm.
change, maybe. We've got another
Yeah.
ODI World Cup at the moment. I don't suppose you want to go to Rohit Sharma now when he's about to
Hmm.
captain an ODI World Cup. I'd say to him, "Hey, big man, we're just going to take this away from you. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this at all." Like, I just think that would be. It's not that it's wrong, because I understand there'll be lots of Indian fans being like, "Of course, that's what you do." But I do think there's
Hmm.
a part of it where you go, "It's just not what you want him to be thinking about right at the moment." But perhaps straight after the World Cup, you just say to him, "Look, we don't think you're in our best two openers anymore. We value your leadership and your captaincy. We're going to go in a different direction for this next World Cup, and we're even prepared to lose it." Right? But
Hmm.
they may not have to worry about that, obviously, with Hardik and everything else. But they could say, "We're prepared to lose it. But what we aren't prepared anymore is to keep losing the same way."
Hmm.
And I think that for me, that would be the way that they should go about it. And I would have absolutely no problems with them doing that and going at it from that direction. So, I like I like the thinking of me, because you were quoting me back to myself before. I just think if you got a good year, right?
Hmm.
I'd like to see those guys playing as many games as possible as the openers, and also see how hard it goes over a long period of time and everything else. I think he's captain enough that they understand his experience level now,
Hmm.
but there is a difference between captaining a T20 franchise that has a couple of journalists covering it and the Indian national team, which has
Oh, yeah.
about 700 million people covering it.
Pretty much. And of course, all of cricket's narrative kind of also revolves around India because they're the cash
Hmm.
rich country, right? And they can't escape from it. But anyway, Gill and Jaiswal, what they did do was give us a glimpse into the future. And Indian supporters should be really, really excited with that sort of prospect. Now, one other player who had an okayish series, I would say, was Surya Kumar Yadav. Came good in the third T20I, completely, took the game by the scruff of the neck, scored one of those quick fire 80 odd runs, which he's so famous for. Usually gets to 100. I don't know. I guess the score wasn't enough on this occasion. But then in the final ODI, he scored his slowest T20 international 50. So
His
a
final,
mixed.
you said ODI, you meant T20,
Oh,
yeah?
I meant
Yeah,
T20.
yeah.
Sorry. In the final
No,
T20
I was just
international,
getting
he
confused. I
scored.
was like, wait, have we gone
Yeah.
back in time?
No. So he scored his slowest T20 international 50 for India in the final T20. And I mean, again, you'd have to say mixed bag of results. Sky is someone who India looks up to as that disruptor, the guy who's
Mm.
going to completely come and dismantle opposition. And it seems like he struggled to do that on this tour. And you've got an ODI World Cup in this year, right? So his form, I feel, is crucial towards India's limited overs exploits because they don't have someone quite like him. He's one of a kind. Even world cricket, you could argue that Sky is a little unique.
Mm.
So, would you be worried at all?
The one day form's really interesting. Someone asked me this, I think on Wagon Wheel recently, whether it was a fluke or what the situation was. And I said, it doesn't actually make sense that he's made so few runs in one-day international cricket. There's nothing within his game that would suggest that. There's nothing within his list A record that would suggest he would struggle in one-day cricket.
And he's honest about it, right? His failures. A
Yeah,
video recently came out, so he's got that jotted down.
I do wonder, especially in one-day cricket, if there is a touch of the Joss Butlers about him. In that, I remember seeing Joss Butler play in the 2015 World Cup. I think I'm right in saying he was in that World Cup. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, I
right.
think he
Yeah.
was.
And they had, if it wasn't then, it was around that period anyway. And they
Mhm.
had like Mo and Ali, who they were purposely telling to bat slow. They had Ian Bell and
Hmm.
Gary Balance and James Taylor and all these different anchors around him. And then
Hmm.
suddenly they had Butler, and like Butler's job was to, I don't know, score up 4 runs a ball and make up for the fact that no one else had, and also average quite a high amount as well. And it doesn't really work that. And I think if we look through the history of cricket, generally you're better off to have a plan, whether it be, I know, a bunch of anchors like New Zealand and Pakistan do, or one anchor and a bunch of attacking players, which takes the pressure off one guy having to do absolutely everything for you. And I do wonder if there's something to that with him in one-day cricket. But I thought it was interesting that he made a slower, more mature T20 innings as well.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's him also thinking about, because he kind of was a very flawed player who suddenly matured and exploded into this absolute freak. It's not like Joss Butler. You go back, early Joss Butler was Joss Butler, right? Early Sky was not early Sky, but
True.
the sky was darker. There was more cloud. I don't know how to explain that, but so I do think from that perspective that he is still probably learning his limits, right, as an attacking player, and so watching him play a slightly more intelligent or not even intelligent, maybe that's the wrong word, just a slightly more geared innings. It's kind of what we need to see from him, because that's the difference between him being a very good hitter and being that sort of next level player.
Right. Okay, so let me just look at my notes if I have. Oh yeah, of course. How could I forget? We were speaking about middle order enforcers and how Sky might be one of a kind in that Indian batting lineup, but there was a player in India's T20 series who kind of had a dream debut series, you could say. Tilak Verma was the second joint highest scorer in the series, only 3 runs behind Nicholas Puran and tied with Brandon King. Really, really aesthetically pleasing left-hander. I loved watching him play his shots, and he was really fearless in his approach as well. So, with respect to middle order power hitters or enforcers, do you think Tilak Verma has made like the perfect audition, perhaps, to go on and fill that gap in India's T20 team in the future?
Yeah, I think they might want him to bat higher. I suppose it depends on. We've got so many injuries at the moment, don't they? Because they've got Aya, KL Rahul, Rishabh Pant. So there's a few guys out there that they're going to have to. Well, they may want to fit in or may try and fit in. From that perspective, I would have thought that the aim with him is probably not to be that middle over. Well, maybe to be the Glenn Maxwell type player, perhaps. Him and Sky sort of, as a Butler Maxwell sort of. Actually, well, Butler doesn't do it anymore, but AB de Villiers Maxwell type partnership, which is something
Right.
really interesting, which is something England don't have, right? So if you think about how you beat the best white ball team in the world, that's a really interesting little combo, right? And then you throw Hardik on the back end of that, and you have a 4-5-6 then suddenly of really interesting different skills. Look, I like the idea of that. Yeah, I don't really see him as that sort of. I think the guy we were talking about the other day is more that number 6, number 7 sort of instant power player. I think he's a different kind of player than that. But look, he's an exciting talent. I feel like over the last couple of weeks, that's all I've been seeing is highlights of him and people talking about him. And, he's coming off the back of one IPL season or one outstanding IPL season. So if you count this as IPL plus 5, 1.5 IPL seasons, that's kind of, you started to get to the point of, okay, it wasn't a fluke. There's something there.
No, and it was away from home as well. And a lot of these wickets were slow. So I think those runs definitely do count for
and
something.
good defensive bowlers as well. So it's not facing Mitchell Stark or Rabada or anyone, but good defensive bowlers.
That is true. So quickly, before we take a break, India have that number 4 conundrum once again in ODI cricket that they've had for like 10, 15 years now, since whenever Yuvraj Singh retired. So who's your pick? Who should be batting for India at number 4 in the ODI World Cup?
Well, I think Rishabh Pant would be a great number 4 in ODI cricket.
Well, he wouldn't make it though.
No, but he's not going to play. I think, but I
Hmm.
was about to say, and I think the next person I would like to play that is KL Rahul, who I think is a really good 4 or 5 in one-day cricket, and he's not going to make it. I'm going to say this, and it's ridiculous, but I was on another podcast today, and they asked me the same question. I think Rohit Sharma is the best number 4 in that squad. Right? I
That's
know
an
it's a
interesting
stupid,
one.
and I'm not saying that to say, oh, we shouldn't be opening. I'm just saying, if you look at what he does best, his ability to sort of knock and milk the spinners, and then once he's set to destroy seam bowling, is actually perfectly suited to batting at number 4. He's not going to get bogged down in those middle overs because he's too good at manipulating the strike. Won't get you as many 2s and 3s, perhaps, with his running between the wicket. But then if you've got him on 60 or 70 and he's set, he can score at 2.5 runs a ball, right? And it's not going to happen. So I don't know the answer is maybe the best way of putting it. There's 3 options I've given there. 2 probably won't play, or definitely won't play, I suppose, in one case. And the other one, you're not going to move. So I don't know how to answer that.
Well, there's a hot take for you, viewers. And I think my pick would be Shreyas Iyer if he gets fit in time.
But he's not fit either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's not fit either.
It's just the same thing over and over again. There's no obvious answer to this. You're right. He would probably be the 4th one on my list. Do you know who else would be good at it? Virat Kohli, but they've got him somewhere else in the order. So it's a really weird conundrum that they've ended up with. A team like in T20 cricket, it's like they have too many anchors, and in one-day cricket, you're like, do they not actually have a number 4 anchor here?
Yeah, well, sort out your shit, BCCI and Team India, because I mean, it's been years now. Sort out your number 4 position. Anyway, this is the Uncovered podcast. We'll be taking a break, and yeah, we'll be back shortly. Here's the ad.
Oh, you say that, and I wasn't. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. In cricket, I don't believe in momentum, but when it comes to my social media videos, I like Memento. Its AI listens to me so that I don't have to, and then it can chuck in GIFs and subtitles and make it all fit all the different kinds of social media sizes. Memento does it all. It slices, it dices, and it resizes all of your hottest takes, your coldest facts, and your weirdest vibes. Grab it today and make your content start smashing the ball all around social media.
Welcome back to the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And of course, with me is Jared Kimber, who is everywhere. So, Jared, the Bangladesh ODI captaincy. Now, let's go back a few weeks. Tamim Iqbal retired and then unretired upon the request of the Prime Minister. And then he had an injured back, right? And that seems to be a bit serious as well because he won't be fit in time to play the Asia Cup. And he's hoping to be fit in time to play the ODIs versus New Zealand, which are directly prior to the ODI World Cup. So it's interesting because, look, Tamim, I think, was quite unselfish when he relinquished the captaincy duties because he wasn't going to be with the team for that long. So I think that bit made sense. And of course, he did speak to the Prime Minister and she understood. This was in the article. I'm not making this up. It happened. What's your take on all of that? Do you think that this kind of leaves Bangladesh in a bit of a pickle? Because Tamim did guarantee automatic qualification as captain for Bangladesh, and that definitely counts for something.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember back. Was it around when they played England? And I can't remember who they played just before England, where it seemed like they had a really nice thing going on of Shakib being the T20 captain and Tamim being the one-day captain. They, played and led it in a slightly different way. And they went about it from that perspective. And I remember it might have been Mohammad Issam, who we're now going to mention for a second time this episode, but not his bowling this time. Who I do think there was a he was saying that he did think that there was a nice separation between those two in the way they thought about cricket. They captained very differently. Look, I remember thinking that at the time watching late Shakib be the captain. So this was probably the England series. I think I was commentating it and thinking that I liked the way that he led the team. I've got no issue in him being the ODI captain. My issue is kind of everything else that has happened, right? Like of how we ended up here, of why they haven't got better people for the job at this point, of the prime ministers and the presidents and the board bosses and all that sort of. That's the stuff I've got a bigger issue of. I honestly don't think of recent times, I've been impressed with. I think he's got a really good natural feel for the game, and I do like the way he was backing the younger players in the T20. I'm okay with that as an ODI captain. I think if you take Tamim out, of their batting, and he doesn't play, I do think from that perspective, this is going to make it a lot harder for them to win an ODI World Cup. And I don't think they were going to win it anyway, but I thought they had a realistic chance of being, the fourth to the sixth best team. I think without Tamim, that's an issue. I'm not sure that I ever thought that much of his captaincy, though, directly, where I thought, his captaincy was so fantastic that you needed it in the side.
So yeah, talking about the person who has, of course, replaced him as captain is Shakib Al Hasan. Needs no introduction. Probably Bangladesh's MVP throughout their history. And I pulled out some numbers, and as captain in 50 ODIs of Bangladesh, Shakib is actually quite a decent record if you consider that this is Bangladesh, because he's won 23, he's lost 26. His batting average drops just under 2 runs when he's captain, but his bowling average pretty much remains the same. Now, he does seem like the obvious choice to lead Bangladesh in this whole Tamim episode, but can be a bit of a hothead at times, right? So do you see that being an issue maybe? Because we've seen Shakib lose his shit at times in the past.
Do I see that being an issue? Potentially. Am I worried about that being more of an issue than everything else that you've just said? Probably not. Look, I mean, you've got the pointing at his groin, match fixing, the fighting with everyone in the world at different times. Look, it is all part of Shakib. I think that you can't discount it. I do think at this age he is slightly less of a hot. I would like to think he's less of a hothead now than he's ever been before. His head is, lukewarm, more so. I think the bigger failure is, as I said, that is their only option, right? That they haven't really produced players or produced leaders the way that they perhaps should have. And that's a reason why their cricket hasn't kicked on as well. So they're having to go back to these two guys, one of which didn't want the job, and the other one is kind of, not that long back after his last suspension, all things being considered. So, look, it's a weird place for them to be, but I don't think it is I don't think it means they're not going to win the World Cup because of it. I don't think they're going to win the World Cup anyway, but I don't think it means that they're not going to be as good. I'm really much more worried about Tamim's batting not, potentially not being available to them than Shakib.
Yeah, Tamim is a big, big blow, and I hope that he does make it in time for the World Cup, because the report that I read, it was a bit optimistic that he might get fit by those New Zealand ODIs. And if that happens, even if that doesn't happen, I'd say even if the World Cup comes up, you just, back Tamim, because he has the experience and he is that level head at the top. But also, Shakib Al Hasan, look, he was the star performer in 2019 in England. And when I say star performer, I mean like top 3 players of the tournament star performer, right? And Bangladesh did quite well considering their previous World Cups in that one, because they finished 5th, 6th, and got that famous win versus South Africa as well at the start. And here's an interesting one about Shakib. So in the games that Bangladesh has won, he averages about 51 with the bat and roughly 22 with the ball. So he is their match winner. And if he has that onus of being captain, maybe, just maybe, this brings the best out of him in the twilight of his career.
Yeah, it might just engage you more. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. I just don't think that they're going to get anything better from giving it to anyone else at the moment. I think, again, the minute it finishes, you would have to make a very big call whether you want him to be your T20 World Cup captain. But he was in their leadership group already, so I kind of think it makes sense.
Yeah, plus, I mean, if Tamim is fit and then Mushfiqur is also, hanging around behind the stumps, I'm sure that those 3 would probably convene with each other and kind of maybe consult each other with respect to making decisions. But yeah, that should be it for the Bangladesh ODI captaincy saga. We'll take another break. You're watching Uncovered, and we will be back shortly.
There is something wrong in the cricket world, and while it may not be a conspiracy, there does seem to be a movement towards leaving more grass on the wicket, and thusly, the global batting average has dropped. If a similar thing has happened to you in your personal life, try Manscaped. Their Lawnmower 4.0 will help you trim any unwanted pubic grass. And once your downstairs track is taken care of, you can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations. So before heading outside, use the Crop Preserver ball deodorant to stay cool in the heat. And if you've been playing too many games recently and you need some help with your strip, why don't you go and get their Crop Reviver? I think I may possibly have taken all of this analogy too far, But the point is, Manscaped sells items that allow you to shave your pubic itch pitch. Use the code REDINKER, all one word, which is the name of my podcast, and you can get a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping while you curate your special strip like a team of sweaty men hoping it doesn't rain.
Welcome back to Uncovered. This is Behram Kazi, and with me is Jared Kimber. So, Jared, on to my favorite section, Pakistan's structure. And before we even get into that, I'm not sure if you've heard, but Mark Coles has resigned mere days before the South African tour from as women's team head coach. So, yeah, I mean, just Pakistan stuff happening once again. 11th hour resignation. He cited personal terms, and really, just when you feel like there's some stability coming in, poof, some bullshit happens just like that. So, I mean, I know you know Mark Coles. Thoughts?
I haven't talked to him, so I don't want it to sound like I'm that I know anything. But my guess is, I'm not saying there aren't personal reasons. There could be very good personal reasons. But having spoken to a lot of coaches about not just Pakistan, but Pakistan and Sri Lanka, I think people kind of feel now that like if you, it's a I don't know a disposable coaching job, right? That it's not solid compared to the rest of the world. You would certainly not drop anything for it, as Mickey Arthur has gone out of his way to show. I think we know that Mark Coles is, played a big change in, women's cricket in Pakistan, as a lot of other people did as well. And there was a bit of, getting the band back together and having him involved with Pakistan cricket. It doesn't feel like it's an ideal thing to have happened, but I think we talked about this in the last episode. There's clearly they've had this change of management, and shit is hitting the roof and hitting other things.
Definitely.
Hitting the roof.
Shit
is
is
that
hitting
right?
the fan. Shit is
Shit
hitting
hit the fan.
Because then the shit is going
then it
everywhere,
hit the
right?
roof. Yeah, but it would also hit the floor.
Yeah.
Don't know how I got that wrong.
But we need the shit to spiral everywhere, which is basically where we're at. So shit has to hit the fan in that regard. And I mean, my personal assessment is that, look, Sethi was adamant to bring him back. Sethi's gone. And so Mark Coles is gone. And that's like 1 + 1 = 2 in my head, at least. But some good news, at least with the women's cricket team for Pakistan, is that for the first time in Pakistan cricket history, domestic contracts have been offered to female cricketers, and there has been a raise in central contracts for the already currently contracted women's cricketers. A bit late to the party, the PCB, definitely, and they so often are when it comes to women's cricket, but that's definitely a step in the right direction, don't you think?
Oh, when I first started covering women's cricket, Pakistan barely had a team. Some of the cricketers looked so like they'd never played proper level cricket before. Like they didn't understand where the umpires were going to stand and how they were supposed to run in and all these sorts of basics. It really looked like a kids team. To see where Pakistan cricket has been over the last little while is wild, really. And so this is the next step, isn't it? Because you got your good team together. You had some success after with Mark Coles and around that era, sort of before and after. There was obviously something building, but they're only going to be good if they copy what everyone else does, which is paying your domestic women, so that you can broaden your talent pool and also make sure that I know if your fast bowler is injured, there's another fast bowler out there who's playing professional cricket and not just bringing her in from some random job she has.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's long overdue, but definitely, I would say, a very welcome sort of step. But on to the fun stuff. Pakistan's domestic structure, the first class structure in particular. Now, 4 years ago, when Hassan Mani and Wasim Khan were at the helm, Imran Khan kind of, went in with his childhood fantasy. He would probably like fantasize about this when he would go to sleep after playing for Sussex or whatever, that Pakistan should have a 6-team first class structure and they should all be.
It wouldn't have been when he
regions,
played for
and Pakistan.
Sussex. It would have been when he played for Queensland that he had that fantasy. But continue.
Yeah, he would have played. Yeah, my bad, of course. But anyway, so he wanted to copy the Australian model. They did that with regions in Pakistan. It did build a bit of fan following, but there was a lot of, you can say, criticism that the departments have been done with. Now, in the new structure that has just been announced, the departments are back. But here's a fun part. They're not going to be playing in tandem with the regions. So the regions are going to be playing their own tournament, which is the Qaid Azam Trophy, which is Pakistan's most prestigious first-class tournament in their history. And the 6 teams are now 8 teams. They are still regions, but they're city-based regions. And it's a tiered structure. So they have actually brought in a second division, and that is going to be called the Hanif Muhammad Trophy. That will have 10 teams. And then, of course, that promotion relegation system is in order, which I think is a good step. The departments will be playing their own first class tournament, the President's Cup, after the Qaid-e-Azam Trophy. There'll be 8 departments, XYZ Bank versus Water and Gas Company,
Mm.
that same sort of drift. So here's my thing with this. First, I want to know, do you think this is a sustainable model? Because in Pakistan, I don't know what is a sustainable model because they'll get rid
Nothing.
of everything, right? And second, I actually feel like it's smart to put the regions and departments aside because the departments have the financial muscle, and you can even see a lot of the same players playing both of these
Yeah.
tournaments. That might be the better paid one and the higher quality cricket one. But with regions, at least you can build some fanfare. Like I'm not going to tune in for uh, Water and Gas versus HBL Bank or whatever. It's not going to catch my attention. But Karachi versus Lahore will. So I mean, you
So,
could get 6
how
weeks worth.
many teams are there in the regional then in the two divisions altogether?
It's 18 teams, 8 in
Okay.
Division 1, 10 in Division 2.
So on its own, that makes a lot more sense.
Hmm.
I probably, if I was running it, I would have a third division as well.
Hmm.
I would actually end up with 3 divisions, and I would make sure that there was always, a movement between all of them, and
Hmm.
there would be constant. I would allow for trades and loans and all these sorts of things, so that the better players can filter into Division 1, even when they're stuck in the wrong team occasionally.
Hmm.
And then what you have separate to that is you have a little bit of the method that really Pakistan cricket,
Hmm.
outside of England cricket and posh schools. The other thing that Pakistan cricket had going for it was that it did have these almost franchise-like teams, right? Which meant that you had to be good enough to pay to play. To get
Hmm.
paid, you had to be at a certain level. That's still a good system as long as those players are mixed in. What I would suggest, though, if it was me, is that you are allowed to have 6 senior players, but then you have to have also 6. Well, actually, 6 senior is wrong in Pakistan, is that because then they'll get fixated with 12-year-olds playing. But do you know what I mean? 6 players of a certain amount of first class games can play in that league. And then the rest of the players have to be players with less than that amount of first class games, so that you're actually using it as a development league, but it's a really good development league, right? If you're playing in that, you might still be going up against a top level Pakistani test bowler, but there's also a bunch of other kids playing around, so you almost get the mix of both things. So you have that, and then we're talking about, let's say, 24. So you're talking about 24 different teams in the first 3 leagues. And then you've got this great development league, which is pay for play, which basically means that, there's a professional structure on top of it and everything else. So from that perspective, that is how I would have done it. But I can understand that we're talking about, a more perfect system on top of this. This is a good system. I look forward to it lasting 2 years and it all being ripped up. But it's a much better system than what Imran Khan wanted, which was stupid. And it probably placates both sides. The people who want to spend money, I still think you want those people to spend money on first class cricket. If they're still willing to do it, encourage that, right? It doesn't come out of your pocket as much. But you also do need that 2 tiers, and you need, we've both talked to Wasim Khan, and it's not like he's a genius on anything in this regard. But he's like, if you have 100 million people, you can't have 6 first class teams because you're going to miss out on too many players. And they've opened themselves up to have that ability. And Division 2 will hopefully be where the younger players are brought through, and then Division 1 is where you would hope that the best players all end up.
Yeah, 240 million, by the way. So that's a lot of people.
But not
Maybe
all of
even
those.
8.
Just so that you're aware, not all of those are men.
Yeah, of course.
I was
Sure.
diluting the pool down, and also it's quite a young society, but there's probably a few old people that also can't get picked. But I'm saying you can't have that. If you have 120 million men, right? That's still more people than live in the UK. They have too many county sides, and Australia has 25 million people with 6 first class teams. And Australia should. This is something isn't talked about a lot. Australia should actually have a proper second tier. When Australia was at its strongest, no one ever talks about this, but the second 11 tier was so strong and was so cutthroat that essentially Australia had a second division. They just didn't call it a second division.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. There is just one caveat with respect to this, and that is from like a selection lens. So you've got the Qaid-e-Azam Trophy and you've got the President's Cup. One is the prestigious tournament. One is probably the better tournament now that you're going to be paying people more. You're going to be attracting the top talent or whatever. A lot of the same players will be playing, but then a lot of different players will be playing. When you come to selecting the test team, Which one do you look at?
You look at
That's my
everything.
only caveat.
No, you factor it
Yes,
in. If you're
yes.
doing it professionally, you work out who they faced in each competition, what kind of pitches
Hmm,
they were on. I don't think having more first class data when selecting your test team should be a
hmm,
problem.
hmm.
And I don't think you should get too hung up on, we run this tournament and they sort of run that tournament, so we won't take that. Yet you need to take as much data as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One final point on this. Now, I'm going to ask you, I mean, you followed Shield cricket pretty much all your life. Has there ever been a region in Australia that hasn't been represented? Because in the previous structure in Pakistan's first class circuit, Balochistan was a team. And okay, they were shit for the most part. But then again, you saw them winning the ODI tournament,
Hmm?
and there was some good stories coming out of it, some local talent as well. It was a happy story because Balochistan doesn't get much representation in Pakistan. And at least they were getting that. They've been scrapped. There is no team from Balochistan anymore,
Yeah.
and that is something that's not sitting well with me.
No, that's a mistake. That's why I want more teams. That's where we go back to Australia. So, uh, up until the 1960s, have a look at how many good Western Australian cricketers Australia had.
Mm,
They weren't in the Sheffield Shield. They weren't playing it. Tasmania don't enter until 1980s, or it might be late 1970s for Tasmania, and we end up almost straight away with Ricky Ponti and David Boone,
mm,
right? Northern Territory, probably the best modern day cricketer. I think Damien Martin grew up in Western Australia, so I don't think he would
mm,
count. But Darcy Short, like if he'd grown up in in a first class environment, probably would have been much better much early on. Canberra's another one that could be.
mm,
Why would you do it? Right? Like you can make a really good argument in Australia if you were really doing talent bases for cricket. That you could almost skip Northern Territory and Canberra would be the other one, right?
mm,
The one that you really want is the Murray region, which actually encompasses South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. Todd
mm,
Murphy's just come from there. Andrew McDonald, Jamie Siddons. There's a lot of really good cricketers that have come from that area because it's a real cricket hotspot. And I'm sure there's a lot more. And a lot of them don't move to Melbourne or to Adelaide or to
mm.
Sydney to play, right? Northern Queensland is another one that I would say. And the other weird one, of course, is the whole Hobart-Launceston divide in Tasmania,
Ah,
right? If you had two divisions, some of these places could have a second team, and then you'd be able to see how good these players are. That's happening in Australia. What is happening in Pakistan? How many good players are being missed in those sorts of regions? And in Australia, you can kind of still find these people because it's a
mm,
smaller population.
yeah.
Todd Murphy still got found, right? And,
Mm,
and still got brought through. Shane Harwood was playing country cricket in Australia, still ended up playing for Australia, right? And Pakistan, I just worry that there are so many international quality players that never make it. And you could throw India into this as well. And all these,
mm,
if you don't have proper talent identification systems and you don't have small regional areas that is looking after, and you talk about Australia, you know, England, Durham weren't a county, right?
mm.
Up until what, 94, 93, I want to say. Steve Harmison, Mark Wood, Ben Stokes.
Ben
Three pretty
Stokes,
good
Paul
cricketers.
Collingwood.
Hey,
Paul
Paul
Collingwood,
Collingwood.
right? Mm,
Paul Collingwood's an average cricketer compared to these other three, right?
yeah.
Like, look at the level of talent they could have missed out on, right?
Mm,
And this happens over and over again. You can do this anywhere, like at any cricket place in the world. Look at all the talent that Sri Lanka has probably missed in the north part of their island, in
right.
the east part of their island, right? You don't know where your talent is going to come from. And if you don't have a system that can develop it, what ends up is you have a player like Darcy Short who just develops later,
Mm,
naturally, because he isn't up against it. It's the same with associate level players. We know that associate level players have been test quality before,
mm.
but most of the time it doesn't develop in the same way because they're not playing against other people like that. And it's exactly the same for your domestic teams.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that angle, of course, that you're going to miss out on international quality players. And also, you're not doing much to growing the game, right? You've got to develop
Yeah.
those regional centers along with those teams so that in the future you can maybe nurture some talent and they could go on to represent Pakistan. And, in a country like Pakistan, where you've got so many diverse cultures within this one country, you need that representation. I
Mm.
think it's absolutely imperative. Anyway, before taking a break, I think we might as well just talk about the cricket of South Africa's,
Yep.
choice that they've made, that they're going to have relaxed fitness standards now. Now, you're the one who actually wanted to speak about this. All I know is that Basically, there was a 2 kilometer run and a skin fold test, and they've
Yeah.
said that okay, you don't necessarily need to pass this to play international cricket. But then again, they haven't really specified what the minimum fitness standard should be. So there's some ambiguity over there, and they're also not really like, I haven't heard of them incentivizing any excellence with respect to fitness. And we've seen this saga, start way earlier when last year you had Sisana Magala, Dane Van Niekerk, who of course is now retired, and then
Mm.
could, what was it, 18 seconds or something like that she failed that
I
two
think so.
kilometer
Yeah.
run test. Yeah. And then Liza Lee is also retired now because of this. So this is certainly an issue in cricket South Africa, but I'm not sure I understand the solution provided over here.
Well, I think they got a lot of flack for losing two of the best women's cricketers in one go. And also, there is no doubt now that, myself and many other people who kept writing the same thing, which is the idea is to be cricket fit. It is not to be fit for a 2K time trial. And also, if your skills, and let's say Dane, let's just take her skills as a bowler and a batter are so much better than another player who is fitter and can move around the field, that is part of selection. That is what you do, right? So there's a reason that Rakim Cornwall has not always been with the West Indies team. And it is times when they look around the field, they go, we can't hide him, right? And there are other times they go, actually, we can. In Test cricket, sometimes they think, well, we can just sit him at first slip and he's got great big bucket hands and he'll catch it a pretty good percentage. In a T20 game, if we've got him and we've got Sunil Narayan and we've got Andre Russell's knees and we've got some other player who's got a back injury, we can't actually, field correctly in this game. That is the fitness test, right? If they believe that Rakim Cornwall cannot help them, it is there. And as cricket becomes more divergent in the kinds of skills that you need, right? Ashwin is not a good fielder. No one has ever said Ashwin is a good fielder, and his batting is fine. But let's say he couldn't bat at all. You're still going to pick Ashwin a lot, right?
Yeah.
And even if he can't run a 2K time trial and he tries really hard, you're still going to pick him. And the reason you're going to pick him is because you don't have anyone else who can do his skills better. This is a fitness-based game and an athletic-based game, but also a skill-based game. And
Right.
and I think that's the one thing that having an arbitrary rule like that. So let's say Shane Warne couldn't pass it, right? And I'm not saying he couldn't, but I do know of a situation where Victoria asked Shane Warne to do a time trial and he refused, right? Let's say Shane Warne couldn't pass it. Are you a better team for not having Shane Warne than you are for having Shane Warne? I can't see that. That's all I wanted to say about it, really. You can go back, you can have a look at my previous work on the topic before. The very basic thing is that there are so many different kinds of athletes in cricket that having one catch-all fitness test in a sport that doesn't have 2K, you don't have to run two kilometers in one go in cricket. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Also, is the skin fold test what it sounds like? Because oh no, that's just weird. But anyway,
also the skin fold one's really interesting. I'll tell you this because I can't remember who told me this, but it was a teammate of his. Aaron Finch used to have neutral skin folds, right? But we remember Aaron Finch. He was, he was a larger gentleman. He had a thicker frame up top, but he had really skinny legs, right? So his skin folds on his legs were really low, and then he had this little belly up top, right? And one of his teammates told me this story, and they said, so he passes the skin folds, right? And some other player who's really quite fit, but just carries a little bit of weight at the top of the bottom doesn't. It's such again, an arbitrary thing.
Yeah.
There are players, if you look at baseball, there are players who are just overweight by conventional athletic standards, right? And who can't run and can't do anything else. But the individual skills that they're really good at is so good that they still get picked. And then they have other positions in baseball where your athleticism and how fast you can move to the ball and how often you can do it and all those things, they do need to measure. We are getting to that point in cricket, but we're not actually doing it. And so, yeah, for me, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Pakistan has a similar thing over here, right? Whenever Azam Khan gets selected, you have all of this uproar that why has Azam Khan gotten selected. But I think I agree with you where, match fitness and, athletic different, though that kind of fitness, they're two different things. And if someone can survive a match without getting, I don't know, huffed, puffed and unfit, I think that should be enough. And like you said, it's a skill based game. So yeah, let's see what the future holds in that regard. But anyway, we shall take a break at this point and we'll come back on the Uncovered podcast with some England World Cup preparation news. So stay with us.
This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Picture this, you made a video and now you want the world to see it in their favorite social media platform. You could bowl into the wind by slaving away making edits, or you could let Memento effortlessly cut those epic moments down, making them perfect for your social media followers. It's like having a runner. You play the shot and they do all the hard work. Sync up your podcast and YouTube and they will be the substitute fielder who does all of the work. With Memento, you can craft a long innings down to the best highlights. Make your content, but let Memento cut it.
Welcome back to Uncovered. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, of course, is Jared Kimber. You can find me anywhere. And the last topic of the day is England's World Cup prep. Now, I read an article, and I can't quite recall who wrote it, but the gist of it was that Matthew Mott suggested that, he still hasn't lost hope that Ben Stokes will, unretire and feature in this ODI World Cup. And I mean, I get the sentiment. He was the hero of England's previous World Cup winning campaign. No, he is Mr. Clutch. Whenever the chips are down, Ben Stokes brings out his best. He has a penchant for that sort of, match winning innings. And I just feel that, with the situation with Ben Stokes' knee and the fact that he himself is saying that he might need surgery, is this even the right sort of frame of mind that England's coach should be in? Like, why do you need Ben Stokes when you've got your Livingstons and Brooks and you have ample resources to go and play the sort of cricket that you want to play, particularly because Stokes won't offer anything with the ball. He'll be primarily a batter. So don't you
even think he'll
have
bowl.
other resources? Yeah, I don't think he could. So don't you think that they have enough resources that maybe they don't need to go back to Stokes and they just can tap into those resources?
I think that what you have here is they thought he was always going to come back. They thought he retired and that when the World Cup came around, he would come back. And of course, what has happened is his knee's just, we still don't know exactly what's wrong with his knee, but it's degraded to a point at which he probably can't come back for this World Cup, right? And so I think this is Matthew Mott's last ditch effort to bring him back. Look, you talked about Brooks and Livingston and those sorts of guys. What they really want Stokes for is the Owen Morgan role. Right, which is not Brooks, which is not Livingston. They want someone who can score at around a run of ball without really taking too many risks, and then can accelerate when they want that to happen. I think that's their thing. I think they believe they're missing that player, or they're going to have to end up with Dawid Malan, who's just not as good a player as Stokes, right?
Right.
Or it may not, maybe someone else. Like they may try and manufacture it another way. But you don't really want Joe. They want that engine room is what they built their ODI cricket on, which is the ability to score between overs 10 and 40 at roughly a run of ball without actually causing too many risks, so that the guys could come in and slog at the end. They still want that kind of player available to them. So I think from that perspective, that's why they want Stokes. But I think 6 months ago, talking to people behind the scenes, I think a lot of us thought he was definitely going to come back. Start of the Ashes, it was really clear he wasn't. The fact he wasn't bowling by the end of the Ashes, I think tells you that it's a lot worse than he thinks it is, or that he thought it was. And I believe what will happen now, you talked about the surgery, is he's going to use this time to come back so that he can get a couple more years of perhaps IPL or England T20 and Test matches in him. I don't think he would risk that for this World Cup, but it's a World Cup. So if he's ever going to risk, I mean, we saw Andre Russell play in the last World Cup, despite the fact that he was about as fit as you, right? He shouldn't have been in that tournament. And so from that perspective, I suppose it's possible for Stokes to come back, but I would think not.
Yeah, I mean, I would advise him not to, because look, we all want to see more of Ben Stokes, and if he burns himself out right now, I mean, I don't even see why England would desperately need. I mean, you presented your Owen Morgan case, but I think that if it was Stokes the all-rounder, I could see more of a point. But Stokes the batter, I don't think they need as desperately. But you never know. Maybe Joss Butler throws him a text, World Cup question mark. Who's to say? Something like this could definitely happen. Some more stuff from Matthew Mott. He is quite keen on Jofra Archer being a part of England's World Cup squad, even if he comes in, back to full fitness later in the tournament. So he would only get a handful of games towards the latter half of the group stage. Now, Jofra Archer is someone who has been absolutely plagued with injuries, right, in the last few years. And it's just injury after injury for him. Yes, we all recognize the threat that he adds to England's bowling attack. And, he, in my books, is the best bouncer in contemporary cricket. But I don't know if this is a wise call because, look, England, if they will, prepare, knowing that their frontline seamer is going to join them mid tournament in the World Cup, why name him in the provisional World Cup squad? Like, it just doesn't add up for me. And then again, you're risking someone's career. Like, someone's got to think about Jofra over here.
Yeah, I think the risking of Jofra, I don't think they'll do it unless they're sure he's going to be okay.
Hmm.
But I do think that they only won that 2019 World Cup because Jofra was fast-tracked through visa issues into the team. Not that they weren't a fantastic team, and I think we know they've been the best team now over the last 8 years, but I think he was the difference that they needed. And I would assume Matthew Mott's looking at the team and thinks, again, that this is the difference. So I don't have a big issue with it unless they're brushing him back in and he's not ready. If you have him in the squad and he doesn't play and you get a couple of short niggly injuries, I think you're in a lot of trouble. Don't get me wrong. I think that having these small squads for World Cups is so stupid and so tight by the ICC that really you should have a 22-person squad, I would have thought. Or at the worst,
18
maybe
at the minimum.
I was going to say 18 or 19 at the minimum is the sort of squad I would want to see for a World Cup. And so we seem to settle at 15 like 30 years ago and nothing's changed. And some PL teams have like 20,000 people in their squads, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me from that perspective. So I think in a really small squad, you take a big risk if you're taking someone over who's not fit. Now, maybe halfway through, if he just doesn't come good, they can replace him anyway. But it means that on certain days, they may not always have enough bowlers available for them in a particular game, which does seem like a risk to me. If they get to a point where it's really, really important, these things take time to get replacements and get the ICC clarifications and all those sorts of things happening. We do see at major ICC events sometimes teams only having to pick from 14 players because of these sorts of issues at times. I don't think that they'd have to really be smart about how they work all that out. And maybe there is a way to do it, and I'm just not thinking of it. But I almost think that the better option, maybe the more random rogue option, is to not pick him. Tell him to prepare like he is going to play, and if they get an injury, bring him in.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Pakistan has done similar things in the past. So, I mean, Jofra, look, who doesn't love to watch Jofra bowl? But I'm just afraid that we might lose him forever. So that's where my apprehension stems from, I suppose. Now, England's World Cup prep overall, you look at what's coming up after the 100, right? You've got 4 T20s versus New Zealand. It makes absolutely no sense. Then, of course, you've got 4 ODIs versus New Zealand and 3 versus Ireland. But they're all in England. They're all in home conditions. So they haven't really given themselves the best opportunity to acclimatize to Asian conditions. And this is the defending champions we're talking about. So do you think that this planning and scheduling was apt? I mean, maybe they could have gone for, an ODI series in Sri Lanka or something like that. I don't know. I know the Asia Cup as well is going on.
I
But
think the Asia Cup is
Ireland
the
and New
issue, isn't
Zealand.
it?
Yeah,
I
Ireland
think
and
the
New
Asia
Zealand just
Cup,
doesn't seem like good prep.
I think so. They played Bangladesh earlier this year, I want to say.
Yeah.
We were talking about it before. And then it's a long period, obviously. And you're right. I think we're going to have to get used to the fact, though, that major teams are not going to prepare the way that we always want. So the problem for England is really that the World Cup comes so close to the end of their summer. And so they don't probably... I reckon it was discussed, but they probably weren't sure about whether they should make their tour shorter. Their summer shorter to send their players overseas during the summer, which from a financial point of view and a political point of view is probably a tricky thing. But then I think the Asia Cup is the other part of that.
Yeah.
That it just comes at the wrong time for them. But no, you're right. It's not great preparation. I think this is, again, when we were talking about before, why you pick experienced players for major tournaments, right? Is because if they go to Asia, all these guys have played in Asia.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that means they hit the ground running the way that maybe some other teams who have played in Asia recently do, but it shouldn't be the reason they lose this tournament. It may be the reason they start slightly slower.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, also another thing is that the fact that they're running both the Hundy and the Royal One Day Cup simultaneously, and of course, not all the best players are available to play the Royal One Day Cup. So I'm not sure, what the future of all format cricket is in England. It seems that the world might be moving away from ODIs, but that would personally kill me. I love ODIs, so I'm not sure where we're headed. Anyway, we have a super chat, so I'm going to take this one quickly. It's our favorite, or well, not favorite, but one of the guys who often sends a chat, and I don't
Geez, you
want to try and press
downgraded
it.
him quickly. He was our favorite, and
Yeah,
now
he
now
was.
you've just
Dhruv,
slagged him
Dhruv
off.
Raman Singh, you still are my favorite. I'm clicking on this thing and it's not coming up. So maybe you
Do you
try
want me
and
to
click
do it?
on it. Yeah, I'll read it out. Is competition level of Ranji Trophy adequate or adequate, or is the talent spread too thin in so many teams? Will three division systems be better?
Yeah, I think there's no level of sport that divisions don't
Hmm,
help, because essentially what you want to be able to do is you want to make sure that there is some guy in the far east of India,
hmm,
right, who, not traditionally seen as a cricket hotspot. You still want them to have a team, and you still want to know if there's anyone there that's any good. And so you don't mind if they stay in Division 3 for years, as Baron was talking about before. Yeah,
hmm,
inclusivity matters, and diversity. You hope that one of those guys comes good, but essentially, what you really don't want to do is not know if anyone there can play cricket, because you don't have them at the
hmm,
proper level. If they sit in Division 3, let's say county cricket went to 3 divisions, and you would have teams like Cornwall and Devon, Staffordshire, maybe perhaps in Division 3. You're not expecting any of them to go and win the title. If they do, it's a great story, and it helps you. But what you really want to make sure is that there isn't some kid in Cornwall who at 17 wasn't on the ECB's radar,
hmm,
but at 19 has a growth spurt of half a foot, and he ends up being 6'8", and he's bowling at 87 miles an hour, and he swings it both ways. And it takes you too long to work out who he is and to get him into a professional setup. You want to know the first moment you can, so you can get him in with all the best coaches. That's exactly the same with Ranji Trophy and everything else, right? So you really want the best 8, let's say it's 8 teams in Division 1 to be playing each other, because that gives you a really good idea if your best players are the best. But you also want all the other teams to be playing against each other. So if anyone does pop up, you have the chance of bringing them to one of the better teams and developing them in the way that you want. What you don't really want is Mumbai playing. God, who was that? You don't want Mumbai playing one of the Pondicherry team.
hmm.
Apology to my entire team who are from Pondicherry, but you don't want Mumbai playing them, because I don't think that helps Mumbai or Pondicherry
Hmm.
particularly all that much. What you do want, though, is when a good player comes from Pondicherry, has the ability then to be drafted into other teams and moved up into a Division 1 team when they show talent. What you don't want is for Pondicherry not to have a team because they're not particularly good. And so you don't know if anyone from Pondicherry is any good at cricket. That's where cricket has traditionally gone wrong.
Amen to that. And just on a closing note, I know you wanted to talk about Stephen Finn. Of course, he has retired from professional cricket. 125 wickets at test level and 570, if I'm not wrong, overall. That's quite a decent career. Of course, injury and mental health issues also plagued his career a bit. You obviously followed it a bit more closely. So the floor is yours, Jared. Give us an ode to Stephen Finn.
So basically, I wanted to ask a question, and so this is
Hmm.
of all my audience, and yourself included, Baron, but has there ever been a player as talented as Stephen Finn who was affected by one other player as much as Stephen Finn? Right. So Graham Smith, as a gamesmanship thing, it didn't bother Graham Smith that Stephen Finn was knocking off the bails, but as a gamesmanship thing to annoy Stephen Finn, he basically said, "Oh, how could I face the bails are falling off? How could I face this ball?" It completely ruined Stephen Finn as a top level test bowler. I do think that there is an issue with Stephen Finn basically bowled in one of the best batting eras of all time and missed out when everyone else in the world was getting good at bowling. His bowling average of 30 between 2010 and 2016 is fantastic in Test
Mm-hmm.
cricket for that era, right? And Graham Smith maybe was the reason he couldn't come back after that. But it is a really interesting one when you focus in on that. There's only 2 other cricketers I could think of. Daryl Cullinan is not thought of as good a cricketer as he should be because of what Shane Warne
Mm-hmm.
did to him. And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at Cullinan's overall figures, he was a fantastic player. And the other player I thought of was Stian van Zyl, who I
Mm.
think went up against Ashwin as a left-hander. I think I've got all those details. I think it was Stian that it was. There was a South African left-hander who just kept playing against Ashwin early on in his career, and of course kept getting dismissed, and it completely ruined him. And that was the end of him as a Test cricketer. And it's very rare for one player to have such a big impact on him. So if anyone else can come up with another player who's been as affected in their career by one player as Stephen Finn was, I would love to know of that story. But I really do think that had that not happened, I think he had in 2016, his bowling average was only slightly higher than Broad and Anderson. And he's younger than Broad and Anderson, and he was faster than Broad and Anderson, and he was a natural wicket taker. My question is, if you could have kept his body fit and Graham Smith hadn't have ruined his bowling action, what would Stephen Finn done with the wobble ball? And would we have seen as much of Broad and Anderson if that's the case? There's so many what ifs with Stephen Finn's career, but feel free to put as many comments as you want below. You know, tag me on Twitter or on Threads. I think I'm on Threads. All these different things. But I think it's a really, really fascinating one, just from that perspective of one player infecting them. And that's why I brought him up. It's okay, Barham. You don't have to have any opinions on Stephen Finn.
Yeah, all I'll say is that Graham Smith also had an adverse effect on Stuart Broad, but he survived. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, I loved his bowling action. I think he gave England some very good moments, particularly in the 2015 Ashes. And yeah, I mean, he seems like a top bloke, and I hope that he has a very fruitful career behind the mic as well, because it seems like he has that
Yeah, he's a good
sort of
commentator.
skill set as well. Yeah, quite a good.
Got a
commentator. But
podcast
anyway,
as well, Zero Ducks Given, if you haven't listened to it, with Daniel Norcross and the other guy whose name I've forgotten.
Yeah.
Something Tarrant.
I don't know. But anyway, I think that is a good place to end this Uncovered podcast. I hope everyone had fun. And yeah, that's it from me, Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me as well was Jared Kimber. Thank you for your time as well, Jared. We'll catch you again next week with another episode of Uncovered. Until then, that'll be all. Goodbye.
I just realized that you have these beautiful segues, and I forget that what I actually need to do is press some of the buttons, of which I will do so
Yeah.